Yeah, thank you again, Nia and Gio and the whole Ujima team. It's just yeah, tons of gratitude being able to share space with you all. As the intro mentioned, my work at the Guild and our organization is focused on building economic democracy from the ground up, and we actually work across all three pillars of land, labor, and capital to do this. But today we'll focus on how we build power with land as sort of the central pillar. Um, to get us just a little bit grounded in how we approach our work. Um, Malcolm X taught us that revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and inequality. And Gio, to like you said, we always have to cite our sources and pay homage to like a lineage in which our work and legacy that our work relies on. And so I just wanted to use this as an entry point to talk about how at the Guild we see land as not just a way to build self-determination and power with marginalized communities, but as a vehicle to allow us to relate to each other differently, and specifically the collective stewardship of land as a means to recognize our interdependence. And so we ground our work in a framework of restorative economics, which basically puts community ownership and community governance at the heart of this work to build self-determination for our communities. Um, the other thing that I'll say as it relates to land is that the real estate industry is and the way land is conceived of in this country, but really globally at this point, is at the heart of nearly every inequity that you can think of. And so, if you care about obviously of gentrification and displacement, you have to care about collective ownership of land, but also if you care about um, food deserts in our neighborhoods, or you care about the defunding of public education, or you might care about the overfunding of our carceral systems, like all of these systems and structures and institutions, if we sort of like peel back the layers, they have a very extractive real estate industry at the heart of it, and at the root of it. And so our entry point to this work is to fundamentally reimagine, redesign, and rebuild an alternative real estate model. And so, as was mentioned in the intro, we think about our work as building economic democracy from the ground up. We are a worker-owned cooperative. I love that check-in question about what cooperatives we want to see in Boston. We are a worker co-op, and then we build community-owned cooperative models of land, housing, and real estate. And our work is also, we look at our work through the lens of community wealth building as a framework. And community wealth building is essentially an economic development model that is based on communities having direct ownership of the assets in their communities. So how do we transform our local economies by communities having direct ownership? This could look like ownership of small businesses, ownership of real estate, ownership of any sort of commercial endeavor that could be collectively owned. And ultimately, community wealth building is about getting to sort of the root causes of inequality. And in this country, land and labor or land and business ownership have been the two main wealth building tools, and they have not only not been accessible or available to Black communities and other communities of color on the same level as white communities, but there has been a history and ongoing phenomenon of extraction when it comes to land. And so we look at our work as, really just trying to get to the root of this underlying system. And just to talk a little bit about this sort of like what we see as a through line of injustice. So obviously this map might look familiar to folks. This is a map of the redlining map, the Hulk maps of this is Southwest Atlanta. And if you were to sort of overlay this map of Southwest Atlanta, the redlining map with a map of where we had a lot of investor activity post the 2008 foreclosure crisis, as well as in the pandemic. And then you kind of overlay that with a map of where we saw the most evictions happen, or continue to see a lot of eviction activity happen. It's a pretty clean overlay, right? And so when we think about gentrification and displacement, which are urgent problems and have been for a couple of decades that we've been aiming to solve for, it is not a new phenomena. It is sort of an inevitability of what happens when we systematically devalue land in Black and other communities of color, and then now we see capital return to these neighborhoods through, you know, private equity or through real estate developers or other corporate interests that are driving up values and putting our communities on the front lines of displacement. And so seeing this as a through line then allows us again to sort of get to the root of the challenge. This slide here, at the start of the pandemic, on the left hand there is an op-ed that we put out at the start of the pandemic to get philanthropy, public investment, our local government, and the larger sort of impact investing ecosystem to pay attention to what we knew was going to happen. We made the call to action to these stakeholders to say, invest in community ownership as a way to prevent land grabs in Black communities in Atlanta. Unfortunately, between 2020, so at the start of the pandemic, to about last year, 1 in 3 homes in Metro Atlanta was bought by investors, and so we did see some of these land grabs come to fruition. And what is known as the Black Mecca, which was a majority Black city, is no longer Black, right? And so I spend a lot of time kind of wanting to get grounded in our context, because I think that's really important as we think through our various ownership models, and ensuring that whatever model we do can both repair historic and ongoing harms and build towards a more just and equitable future. And so with that, we have 2 models of community ownership when it comes to land and real estate. We have a community land trust, our People's Community Land Trust, that specifically focuses on single family homes, duplexes, quadplexes, multifamily apartment complexes. So any housing goes into our community land trust. And then we have a model that we developed called the Community Stewardship Trust. And I'll spend the bulk of today's presentation talking about the Community Stewardship Trust, but it is a model that allows us to put mixed use or commercial properties into it, and it acts as a vehicle for community wealth building. And so I'll talk, like I said, more about it, but just to say that we landed on 2 different ownership models, again, to get to some of the root causes. And when we think about even today's topic of power, right? We got to these 2 models through some sort of power analysis around these different types of assets. So when it comes to housing, we really wanted to understand who has the power now, whose power is being taken away from in terms of status quo models. And so when we think about housing, it's primarily, you know, low income tenants, unhoused folks, even legacy Black elders that might be homeowners, but are now seeing, because they're not able to pay property taxes, as land values have gone up in their neighborhoods, are seeing their homes foreclosed on, and actually bought by a lot of the same culprits, private equity and corporate interests. And so when we think about housing, our goal is to essentially decommodify housing, to treat housing as a human right and not as a commodity. And so that looks like taking land off the speculative market, putting it into a community land trust model, and then also having tenants have governance over their own space, right? So we're not like a landlord and them as tenants, but they're a part of our board, as well as leave the stewardship of the properties that live within the People's Community Land Trust. So that's on the housing side. When it comes to commercial properties, in terms of who has the power, it is right now developers, speculative investors that have the power that are coming to our neighborhoods with like bags of cash, buying up properties that have been either sitting vacant or abandoned in our communities for a while. Again, because of that systemic sort of disinvestment, right? And so, but in terms of who creates value in these neighborhoods, it's the small businesses that have been located in these neighborhoods despite sort of generations of disinvestment. It's residents in the in the neighborhoods that patronize these small businesses, right? And so our thesis when it comes to commercial properties or mixed use properties is that the folks that are creating the value should be entitled to the wealth that is generated from these assets. And so I'll spend the rest of my time, like I said, talking about the community stewardship trust model and how it democratizes wealth and power through the model. I find that the best way to talk about it is to actually give y'all an example of a property that's within our community stewardship trust. So this is our first community stewardship trust and the first property within it. We are located in Southwest Atlanta, this particular property in a neighborhood called Capitol View. And Capitol View is one of those neighborhoods that used to be historically Black, that has been gentrified or is in the process of being gentrified, and has seen a lot of investor capital enter. The building on the right-hand side, that small square there is the building as we purchased it a few years ago. So as it stood, it was a 7,000 square foot vacant building. It had been actually sitting vacant at a very busy intersection of the neighborhood for almost 10 years when we purchased it. And so when it came on the market, we sort of realized, like, if not for us working with the community to acquire it, it might have been purchased by another investor that would have been flipped for like a high-end development. And so we were lucky to be able to acquire this. And since then have gone through a co-design process with the community to understand what they wanted to see out of this space. And so, of course, affordable housing came up as a big need, and we're building 2 stories of affordable housing on top. But the community also really wanted to see a grocery store. There's no way to get healthy produce within a 2 to 3 mile radius from this neighborhood. And so some of the grocery chains are, like I said, located about 2.5 miles out of the neighborhood. And Atlanta is a very sort of car dependent city, and it's not easy for folks to be able to access healthy food. And so we are building a neighborhood grocery store within this space, as well as 3 commercial kitchens that are Department of Health certified, that allow Black owned businesses and Latinx owned businesses from the neighborhood to locate there, to grow their business, and ultimately get larger restaurant space if that's what they choose. But just to say, in terms of power, right? Like, co-design for us is not a one-time, like, check the box kind of process. We think of co-design as an ongoing relational dialogue with the community. And so we approached it through different ways. We did everything from literally having people like write on the building, as you see on the right-hand side there, in terms of what they wanted to see, but we also hosted block parties. We hosted mutual aid, like food distribution networks from our space at the height of the pandemic, when people couldn't access masks or food or any of the sort of meet their material needs. And so we did it through, like I said, mutual aid pop-ups. We had a very strong focus on intergenerational community coming out. So we had the kids and the grandmas and everyone in between show up to various events that we hosted. And every event we made sure there was like food, fun, joy, and music, but then some element of co-design that happened as well. And then the co-design went all the way into the housing. So we actually, our architect on our team would pull up CAD drawings on Zoom and in meetings and have the community sit around to design these apartment spaces that you see here. So we have a mix of studios, 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. And we also do take vouchers, and we have a couple income restricted units. And so we welcome Section 8 vouchers in our space as well. A lot of landlords in Atlanta turn people with vouchers down. And so that's part of part of the larger issue. And we, in our space, we definitely welcome folks with vouchers. And then, like I said, there's our goal has been, when we work with the community, to understand sort of some of the ongoing food justice issues in the neighborhood and build a space that could provide both produce, but also access to prepared foods. And so some of the folks you see here are the people that will be locating in our space. In a prior life, before we became developers, we had a lot of small business community wealth building like programming that we would do. And so some of the businesses that are locating in our space went through our accelerator programs a few years ago. And so this was like kind of a full circle moment where not only do we provide technical assistance to these businesses, but they can also get affordable commercial space in our building. And then once the building, so the building and other projects like this, once they're nearly done with construction and are ready to be revenue generating, we move them into our model called the Community Stewardship Trust, like I said. The Community Stewardship Trust is set up as a public benefit corporation with the community as its shareholders. So think about it as a trust where you could put in multiple properties within it, and any financial returns that the trust generates through the properties gets returned back to community shareholders in the form of dividends. And then because we are located in neighborhoods where property values are going up because of gentrification, instead of us as developers sort of extracting that wealth out, that remains with the community and is reflected in their share price. So for example, folks are able to buy shares at $10 to start with, but in a few years, if the property values go up, their share price goes up as well, so they can cash out at a higher amount. And these are sort of the steps that we follow. So like I said, using 918 Dill Avenue as the example, we work with community to identify which property would be a good fit for the stewardship trust. We go through a co-design process. We develop the property, and then we open up the investment offering for community members to buy shares. And we do a lot of educational workshops and curriculum to prepare folks to invest. We are working with communities that are quote unquote low wealth, that have not in the past had opportunities to invest. And so we do a lot of both financial education, but other education as well, political education, popular education around these collective ownership and stewardship models. And then once tenants move in, so we've got the grocery tenants moving in, the small business tenants moving in, tenants on top moving in. Once folks move in, start paying rent, whatever, after we get rent minus expenses, whatever's left over, like I said, goes out as dividends. So there is some financial return for the community, but I think maybe equally, if not more important, is the collective decision making that happens. And so community members get to decide what properties in the future would get put into the trust. So for example, we get calls from the community that the neighborhood daycare is closing. Can we buy a property and put that and convert that into a daycare and put that into the neighborhood trust? So it's a way to basically acquire any abandoned or vacant asset in the neighborhood and turn it into meeting the community's needs, and then putting it into this model that allows us to sort of democratize the wealth that is generated from these properties. Like I said, there's, these are like low dollar accessible investments. So we're starting at $10 a share. It's one person, one vote according to cooperative principles. And then there is we put in place a philanthropic backstop, which is essentially, think of it as a grant that acts as a reserve to protect against any downside risk. So if we have another crisis like we did in 2008, the community will not lose what they've put in. So at the bare minimum, they'll at least be able to get back what they've put in, even if they don't generate like huge financial returns. And so this is one way to prevent sort of ongoing harm that might happen through the real estate development. Let's see, how am I doing on time, Nia? I think I'm getting close to
you have 6 minutes, and
okay.
we already have a question in the chat for you too.
Okay. So I can just go through this really quickly. Just a couple more properties to share with y'all that are going into our first community stewardship trust. This is at the same intersection of 918 Dill Avenue. We purchased two other parcels of land and a property that is at the same intersection. And we've been really thinking about an intentional like buying back the block approach, and have worked with the community to identify those properties. So one of the properties, 890 Dill, where you see that banner that stands on that building, that came to us. There was a group of 20 Black commercial real estate professionals that had purchased that property, and at the height of the pandemic, soon after we purchased ours, and ultimately their plans were not able to materialize. And so when they were ready to sell the property, they reached out to us instead of putting it out on the open market. And so this is one way in which by having existing relationships with the community, we're able to acquire some properties before they get put on the open market and bought by investors. The final property that we have in our first community stewardship trust is known as the multi-use Radical People's Hall. We're renovating a 10,000 square foot industrial space and converting it into a movement infrastructure hub with some of our partners. This building was stewarded by a movement organization, Southerners on New Ground. And similarly, because of the sort of macroeconomic pressures that were happening during the pandemic, they weren't able to develop the property, but reached out to us in order to, and actually sold it to us below market, which was amazing. And we're able to continue to work with 3 organizers from Song to develop this to become our movement infrastructure hub. So we have 10 office spaces here for community-based organizations and nonprofits. We have a large event space within here, and then we have a maker space that you see on the right-hand side, where organizers can make merch or signs for protests or other things that might be required for their organizing. And this is just an example of sort of multiple roles that we play in the ecosystem. So in the case of the MRF, the guild, our worker cooperative, acted as a real estate developer. Our fund acted as the capital provider, and then the community stewardship trust will take ownership of the asset once it's completely developed. The organizers from Song were very intentional about ensuring that the property remained in the hands of community ownership over a long period of time. And so this ended up being a really ideal partnership for us. So I'll end there. I know there's a few questions here, but I did touch on our community land trust, and this is maybe a more well-known model, but since there's so many land trusts in Boston, you all might already be familiar, but just to say that we partner with a few grassroots organizations to incubate the land trust, and we have, like I said, single family homes, as well as apartment complexes. And we were able to put the first multifamily apartment complex into a land trust in Atlanta. So we're actually the first community land trust that's not sponsored by the city, the very first community land trust in Atlanta. Okay, I'll stop there. And
Very, very cool. Thank you so much, Nikishka. And if we could just come off mute really quickly just to give Nikishka. And I also have to say, pretty impressive. We didn't hear any, it was like well timed. We didn't hear a bunch of announcements behind you. So that works out. All right, so let's jump right into the Q&A. The first question came from Andy in the chat, who asked, how do you determine who can be a member?
yeah, great question. In terms of oh, sorry, go ahead.
We can hear, okay, we can hear you, and we're muting so you don't get any reverb. Go ahead.
Okay. In terms of who can I'm assuming the question was related to our community stewardship trust, like who can be a member of the community stewardship trust. We take a zip code approach to it. So anyone that lives in, or what we say has a meaningful connection to 30310, which is our zip code of our first CST. Anyone who has a meaningful connection to 30310 can invest in that particular CST. And we use that term to keep it broad enough because we understand that a lot of displacement has already happened. Like folks have already moved or been forced to move outside of the zip code because rents have gone up. And so we don't want to be able to prevent folks that have been displaced from investing. But also if people have like a meaningful connection through maybe a church or other religious institution that they frequent within the zip code, or maybe their kids go to a school in the zip code, we keep that open for all of those folks. And we have two, I forgot to mention, but we have two share classes. So there's a class A shares, which are community investors, and these are folks that are making 80% of the area median income or below. And then we have a solidarity share class, which is newer residents that have more disposable income. So if they make 80% of the area median income and above, they're solidarity investors. And the only difference between the two investor classes is that we ask solidarity investors to keep their money in longer, so they can't cash out as quickly as the community investors.
Thank you, Nikishka. Next question. I'm gonna just keep them coming. So Gio asked, and Gio, feel free to jump in. You're in the room with me. Are all renters community investors by default? And then I think he put in a reference, which is in step 5. It says community investors make decisions together. Oh, there are two different questions. I'm sorry. First question: are all renters community investors by default?
Yeah, that's a great question. We went back and forth on that a little bit, and we won't preclude someone from living in our space if they don't want to become community investors, but we do encourage it. And we also offer things like part of their rent can go towards buying shares if they want to choose to do that. And so we do have some flexibility there, but we certainly like encourage it again to just sort of like build that fabric of solidarity, so we don't have different different interests competing with each other. But we don't mandate that. And then in terms of what decisions do they make together, this could include decisions around, like I said, future properties that would move into the stewardship trust. So if there's another property that becomes available on the market, it has to go through a vote before it can move into the stewardship trust. And so that's like one example of it. But let's say our grocery tenant wants to move out after their lease expires, and we need to find another tenant, the community will also vote on that kind of decision. And we have 2 board levels as well. So we have a stewardship board and a board of directors, and the community shareholders also elect members to the board.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikishka. Next question. Dr. Sandy asked, where does the money come from to purchase the property? Is it only from the community? How does this work?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually work, so we do a lot of organizing with philanthropy and wealth holders to get a certain, what's called like a capital stack on the front end, to acquire and develop the property. So for 918 Dill Avenue, the total project cost was 11 million. 5 million of that was through, which is now our fund. We were able to work with a foundation called Katali Foundation that put in money at 1%, and actually they reduced that to 0%. So they gave us 0% money. So we pay back the principal at the end of 10 years, but we don't pay any interest on it. And then another million of the development came through our through public source. So our housing opportunity bond from the city of Atlanta. And then the rest of the 5 million came from a CDFI, a community development financial institution, that gave us a construction loan to complete construction. And what the community is doing is they're essentially buying back the low cost 0%, 0 to 2% capital that, for example, our fund through Katali Foundation put in. So they're buying back well below market, and any upside that is generated is transferred to the community. And yes, I see your comment. Yes, you can absolutely contact me, Dr. Sandy. So yeah, hopefully that answers.
Yeah. And if I could just say something really quickly, Nikishka, just want to mention for the room, Katali Foundation, who Nikishka mentioned, is currently headed by Amaka Agbo. And you might have seen in one of the earlier slides when Nikishka talked about restorative economics, that was attributed to Amaka Agbo. So just want to kind of point out the connection between, I would say, kind of values and process and support, which is one of the things I particularly love about the Guild. I think they've done a really good, down to every tiny detail job of having a direct translation between their values and the work that they actually do, their investments and their processes. We see it throughout the ecosystem with foundations like Katali. So Morgan asked, you mentioned setting rents above what's needed to cover expenses. How do you determine how much above expenses the rent should be?
Yeah, that's a great question. We for every project that we do, we run a pro forma for the project. And so for 918 Dill Avenue as an example, we looked at what is the cost of capital. So that was includes the 0 to 2% that was put in through philanthropic sources, and the 1% of capital that came in from our housing opportunity bond, and then the construction loan. The construction loan interest rate is higher. It's about close to 6%. And so we had to match, like, when do we owe each of those sources of capital back to the provider? And so, like, what's the cost of capital? What's the cost of and do projections around like maintenance, reserves, other repairs that the building might need, et cetera. And then sort of set the rents slightly above that to give us a little bit of breathing room on our reserves. And so for 918 Dill, that looks like 60 to 80% of the area median income, which honestly is not, from a housing perspective, is not as affordable as we would like it to be, which is why we also take other sources like Section 8 vouchers, et cetera. And then we make sure that on the community land trust side of things, which is why we keep housing a little bit separate from the stewardship trust, we're able to get to a deeper level of affordability there. So that's closer to 30% AMI, 30 to 50% AMI of area median income is where our community land trust rents can get at. But there is a tension between being able to provide some wealth building for the community shareholders, but also making sure that rents, whether it's commercial or residential, are stabilized over a period of time. So that's the other thing we make sure we do, is we don't have the escalation that you tend to see even in some affordable housing projects. Like when a subsidy expires, like rents go up pretty significantly on a lot of projects. Or you have like the escalations that happen every 3 to 5 years. We make sure we don't do that. So that's sort of our process.
Thank you. Phyllis asked, who decides, this is a popular question, Nikishka, who decides who the renters will be, since there must be many more people wanting to rent than housing is available?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, very recently we put out a call for applications to one of our community land trust properties. We had 1 unit available, and we had about 90 applications that came in. And I mean, that's how dire the housing crisis is. And so we have a series of steps that we go through, and we use a similar application across all of our properties. And so while we do things like standard like background checks, et cetera, we make sure we don't penalize folks for like bad credit scores, for example. We do check criminal history to make sure there's no like violent conviction around guns or kids. That's one thing we check for. But in terms of prioritization, we have to follow fair housing laws. So we do like first come, first serve, do the background checks, but do our best to prioritize people that are currently in a dire situation that could benefit from affordable housing in this moment. So yeah, that's our general process.
And just a quick bit of feedback from Matthew. Matthew in the chat said, I'm learning a new term today, restorative economics. It's very cool. And I know Gio put a link to Katali Foundation in the chat, and we'll find a link specifically to restorative economics, and we'll put that in the chat for you. Margaret said, seems like one difference between a community land trust and a public benefit corporation is that a public benefit corporation shareholder could sell shares at a profit based on market appreciation. as opposed to limited equity for sale or property owned within the community land trust?
Yeah, so in the public benefit corporation model, so that's just like the tool that we use for our community stewardship trust, but the model itself is a community stewardship trust. That's just the legal setup. Um, the share price appreciation that is tied to market appreciation, not all of it is allocated to the share. So what I mean by that is, let's say a property was, let's say it's worth 1 million in year one, but then the property value goes up to 1.5 million. We won't take all that 500,000 appreciation and put that as and reflect that in the share price. We'll keep some as a reserve within the project pro forma. So we do want, though, like some upside. Again, it's still limited equity because we don't allocate all of it. But the idea here is like commercial properties in particular, when there is wealth generated, that does go back out to individual shareholders. And again, these are folks, we prioritize folks that have not had access to investment tools before. And so this is a way to have some small wealth building component in there.
Erwin asks, what is the analysis of power that you see community stewardship trust slash community land trust? Is that what that's supposed to say, Erwin? Community members come in with. How does that change, transform as they take on leadership roles?
Yeah. I'll answer that. And I also see a very interesting question from Phyllis in the chat. So maybe I'll do both of them and then I'll hop. But in terms of the analysis of power that we see members come in with, I mean, it's like a pretty wide spectrum, as you might imagine, in any community. I think one like anecdote that I can share, and some of this is still unfolding because, we haven't been around for that long in terms of these models. And so some of this is like live learning as we go, but we have had the opportunity to, I guess, transform some of our members like takes on policing, for example. So some members might have entered in with an analysis around, or not the analysis that we share around policing and Black communities, for example, and might otherwise have call the police on unhoused people or call the police on Black folks, right? And so sorry, what was that?
No, I
sorry.
think someone was unmuted. I muted them. Go ahead, Nikishka.
Okay. Anyway, and so we have been able to shift some folks' thinking around that. So that's just like one sort of quick anecdote. And then Phyllis this question, which was, given that land is the basis of freedom, if most people are renters, that means they cannot pass on the unit to families. So how is this renting model seen as preserving wealth? So we have, like I said, two different models. The model of the community stewardship trust, which is renting primarily of commercial assets, has wealth building through the share price model. On the community land trust side, when it comes to housing, we do work with both renters and homeowners. We're trying to grow our homeownership base around that. So we do make if folks can qualify for a mortgage, we absolutely will transform that unit from a rental to an ownership model. So that is something we continue to advocate for. But I will say that home ownership in our opinion and learning just does not function the same way for Black families and Black communities as it does for white families. And so which is why you see post the 2008 crisis, like Black families have still not caught up with the wealth that was lost, whereas white communities have exceeded that already. And so I think home ownership, and this is like this country's identity is so like wrapped up in home ownership, and it's like a hard nut to crack. We like deal with that, but we believe in offering like a diversity of models to like simultaneously challenge, like I said, the roots of this system. And I don't think home ownership in and of itself is like any kind of silver bullet. And so yeah, we really work to preserve and stabilize communities, because oftentimes what's not accounted for when we think about wealth the wealth that is lost from having to be displaced constantly or evicted or not having access to economic development opportunities in your own neighborhood. We don't think about the wealth that, that is lost to that. So we really try to take a whole systems approach to it.
Thank you, Nikishka. 7 o'clock on the dot. Let's let Nikishka board. Let's not let her have her miss her flight. Thank you so much. Let's all unmute.
Thank you so much.
This was fantastic. Thank you so much. And safe travels. And until next time, Nikishka.
Thank you. Thanks, Nia. Thanks, everyone.